Hey everybody, Chris here from CSS Tricks. I'm going to do something I don't think I've ever done before. Is just give one of my presentations that I often do at conferences, just give it to my screen here and release it kind of as a screencast. I like it when these things reach as many people as possible. So this particular talk is called Let's Do Some Stuff to Make Our Websites Faster. Really, really simple stuff. Making our websites faster, a big deal. Web performance is such a big deal these days. You know, like you make your website faster and people just like it more, even unconsciously. It's one of those funny things that nobody ever asks you to do either, right? You'll never get a support request that asks you to make your website faster. It's just one of those things that you know you need to do. And it's just been empirically proven all over the place. You make your website faster and just, sales go up and your bounce rates go down and yada yada. It's just a good idea, and it's a thing that there's some really easy things to do to improve it that we're going to cover here. So otherwise known as the other responsive design, right? Responsive, defined the other way, like it's fast and like you click something and something happens right away. The things are literally responsive. So you all know me, right? Chris Coyier. I'm at Chris Coyier on Twitter and GitHub and Pinboard and app.net and all the different stuff, right? I run this little web app called CodePen.io that's kind of like a playground for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, building and sharing kind of neat stuff with other people. It does a lot of stuff. Check out CodePen. I'm recording this very screencast for css-tricks.com. This little at the moment that I record this is a bit of a sneak peek to the redesign of it, and I do a podcast with Dave Rupert called Shop Talk Show, where we talk about all things web there. So that's a little bit about myself. Again, let's do simple stuff to make our websites faster, and I really want to focus on the simple. These are very easy things. So we're going to get to 4 takeaways, things you can literally do on your website. I need to preface it a little bit and give a little background here, but you're going to walk away today from watching this video with 4 tips. So this guy, Paul Irish, works for Google on the Chrome team, knows a lot about web performance, likes to spread the word about web performance, very smart guy, works on lots of cool web projects you might have heard of, like Modernizer and the HTML5 boilerplate and newer stuff than that. He's a very smart gentleman. I talked to Paul about this talk, and he said, you know what, I have some thoughts about that. Before I really got started putting the slides together, let me forward you an email email thread that I had between me and Billy Hoffman, who's Zoomph, does it's kind of a web app around performance and does kind of some consulting and stuff in that arena. Billy knows a lot about web performance, and it was a great email thread. And Billy outlined some stuff that's kind of some criteria when you're going to pick something to work on to make your website faster. Start with things that have this basic mantra: low effort, big impact, right? Like things that are easy, but they have they're going to make a big difference. And there's, believe me, there's things that you could work on that take a lot of work that have a low effect too. So anyway, these are the kind of the criteria, right? And there's a couple of these too. So let's go through them. So when you're going to pick something to work on, it should have an awesome effect on the performance, right? That you're loading pages, that you're going to pick something that might make your web page load about 0.5 seconds faster, not 0.005 seconds faster, right? Like if you're going to pick on one thing to work on, which one should it be? It's pretty obvious. Like if you're a lumberjack or whatever and you leave for the day and you're like, honey, I'm going to go chop some wood and bring it back for the fire. Should I bring back 5 pieces or 500 pieces for the same amount of effort? Obviously you want more for your effort. So that's the idea here. Pick big targets. These things that you should work on, that you should be able to do with a single person without having to coordinate with a whole team, right? These should be easy, not something that you need to schedule a meeting about that's going to, be the kickoff meeting for a real meeting where you decide the best course of action and the blah, blah, blah. Like these should be just things like, oh, I'm going to make this faster. Up, done. So easy, make them easy. That don't require complex or mature processes, right? So that it's not like when you commit to your GitHub repository that the script runs and I just put some like silly gibberish down here that you write a script that on every third push it clears the 9th ring of geocache while syncing the auto version goat files. Like there's fancy stuff too that can happen in web performance, but we're not going to talk about those. We're going to pick the easy fruit first. It doesn't need a big procedure. You don't need a team to work on, and that don't, basically that things that don't require babysitting. Let's pick these easy ones first. Not something that's going to require constant maintenance. It's something you could just do and it will have a good impact for a long time. So those are those four things on one page. Those are the criteria that all of our things that we're going to work on are going to match that criteria. And I want to add one more here. So there's this guy named Steve Souders. He's like the guru of web performance. His blog is all about web performance. He's got books on web performance. Also works for Google, I believe. Very smart guy that kind of lives and breathes this stuff. And he has this cool thing called the performance golden rule, or the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 referring to, or the 80% referring to on average, 80% of the end user response time happens on the front end. So the end user response time being essentially the time that it takes for a web page to load. 80% of that time is spent on front end stuff, things that concern front end developers. So if you ever, if you use Chrome, or really all browsers have this, modern browsers have this these days, kind of the network waterfall chart. So if you kind of open up the inspector, and this is a screenshot of Chrome's, and go to the network tab, it shows you those little pillbox, those multicolored things at the bottom there. Are the different resources that it took to build your web page. Web pages, you guys, are built from lots of individual resources. I'm sure you knew that, right? And this is a kind of a chart of when that resource started to load and when it finished. So you can usually just kind of see the top there, but really they're usually very, very long. And I kind of photoshopped this one together to get us the kind of complete shot of an entire sampling of a network waterfall chart for one particular website. On this particular, just to explain that 80-20 rule, the little blue pill at the way top there, that's the document that the server sent down. So the web browser asked for a particular web page, and the server responded with a document. And that's the little blue pill at the top. That's 20%. That's all server related. That's the 100% all server side stuff. And then the browser starts reading that document. And in that document, it links up CSS files, JavaScript files, image files, all that stuff. And then it loads those resources. So the rest of the resources here is the 80%, is all that front end stuff. The point that I mentioned this is, so on this particular website, it's 117 requests. It has a very large file size, and it's not even really relevant to this talk. That's really huge for a website, but whatever. I was just looking at this particular website. It took about 4.59 seconds to load, or exactly 4.59 seconds to load. And then if we split that up, if we take the 1.16 seconds it took for that document to come down, that means we have 4.43 seconds it took for all the front end stuff. And that percentage then was more like 3%, 97%. So the 80-20 is just kind of a general rule. And it actually comes from Steve looking at different swaths, different parts of this. We took the top 10 most popular websites in the world and saw that those percentages were more like 24-76. He took 10 that were around the 10,000 popularity level and got those percentages, startups, and then like the entire top 50,000 of them all together, and got some numbers. So it's not exactly 80-20, but it lines up pretty close, right? It's just kind of a rule of thumb thing, saying that for sure on all these websites, front end is way bigger than back end as far as how long it takes a website to load. So in addition to those four things that we talked about earlier, if you're picking something to work on to make your website faster, let's add a number 5 there. Focus more on the front end than the back end. Unless your website is down, that's probably a back end problem. But if your website is fine, it's up and being okay, you just want to make it a little bit faster, focus on front end stuff, and that actually might keep your back end up longer anyway. So here's the plan. Let me tell you what the 4 things are that I'm going to tell you to make your website faster, that match all those criteria, and then we'll go in a little bit more into depth on each one of these 4 things. Number 1, turn on HTTP compression, otherwise known as gzipping or deflating. Mod deflate is a very big deal in web performance. Caching things is a very big deal. Losslessly optimizing your images is a very, and spriting if you can. We're not going to get a lot into that because it's a little bit more complicated than these really easy wins. But these are just losslessly optimizing. It's one of the easiest things you can do to save time and make your website faster. And then combining your CSS and JavaScript files. And you see I mentioned spriting above. Spriting is essentially combining image files. So anytime you can combine resources together to send down less files, that's a big deal for web performance. So those are the four things. Let's talk a little bit about each of them. Number one, turning on HTTP compression. Let's explain that really quickly. So on the left is our server and on the right is our browser. And as we know, websites are made of individual resources or files. So in the case that the browser needs a file and it comes from the server, when you're not gzipping, that file can just start on the server and just traverse the internet across that black line there and arrive at the browser. So it leaves the server the same way and it arrives to the browser in the same way it left the server. So that's not gzipping. But what happens when you gzip is that server exists on the file. The server zips it. So I would think everybody knows what zipping is, right? It's just a way to compress a file a bit into a .zip, and then you kind of can expand it back into the original file, but the zip is smaller. So the server can do that for your website resources automatically. So it'll squish it, send the squished one across the internet, and then your browser unsquishes it and uses it. And that happens so fast that it's definitely worth it to do that. Essentially, it's always better to gzip all the resources on your site. It's just always better. So you should do it. So a lot of hosts automatically do this, right? Some hosts just turn it on because it saves them so much bandwidth. It's smart to just automatically have it done, but not all of them do. To find out if you're gzipping all your resources on your site or not, you can use a website to do it. So go to gzipwtf.com, put in your website, click the button, it will kind of tell you if you're gzipping your resources or not. In this case, I'm good. I am gzipping, and there would be different results if you were kind of failing this. So if you're not gzipping and you want to be, here's one way that you can do it. You can fix that problem. Go to the HTML5boilerplate.com and go over to click on the Contribute on GitHub button here. So this is funny because just yesterday, or maybe even early today, I can't remember, they released a new design for this site. So this will look a little different when you go there, but just find the button that will get you over to GitHub, and this part will look the same. Here's the main repository for this. Click the .htaccess file. You don't have to be a GitHub master to work on this. You don't need to use version control at all. We're just going to go snag a little code from this file. So click on that and scroll down to the point where it says gzip compression in the comments, and copy all of that code in there, and then bring it over to your code editor and where you have the root of your website open. So at the root, there should probably be a file called htaccess. And what you do is just paste the code in there. And if there's not a file, you can create it there. But a lot of, like if you run WordPress, for example, which is what's happening here, it's probably already there, and there's probably some stuff in there to make WordPress do its thing. Now, if you don't know what web server you're running, it's probably Apache then, and this will probably work. If you know that you're using something else like Nginx, the HTML5 boilerplate has a configuration stuff for gzipping things on Nginx as well. So if you I don't want to limit you to just Apache here, but the way the boilerplate code works is that there's a lot of code in there that kind of just makes sure that it works no matter what version of Apache it is, or screwed up server settings, or all kinds of stuff. You may not need all that code. If you don't want to think about it, you can just copy the paste, put it in there, and it will work. And believe me, it's a benefit, and it will work fine. If you want to be really, really efficient, just figure out what host you're on and look up in their documentation. Hopefully they have it. This is the Media Temple documentation on it here that explains on how to use mod deflate, which is the same thing as gzipping, right? Kind of synonymous words, and explains how best to do it on their hosting. So that's kind of the best way to look it up. But if you can't find this information or just want an easy thing, just go grab that code from the HTML5 boilerplate. Number two is caching. Just cache stuff, right? You know what caching is? It's just kind of like save files so that it doesn't have to kind of regenerate them or use them again. There's actually two kinds of caching. There's client caching or browser caching. The client kind of just means browser often, right? In our world anyway. And then server caching. So what client caching is a browser asks a server for documents or for some files or whatever, and the server's like, hey, here's in the document, you're gonna need these files, and the browser's like, oh, hey, don't even send them down, don't even bother, I got them right here. I already got them, so I don't need those files to be sent across the internet. It is the slowest thing, I should mention, we'll probably mention this a few more times, the slowest thing a website can do is go ask for a file across the internet and have to wait for it to arrive. So we're circumventing that with client caching. And we'll get more into that in a second. And then there's server-side caching, which we're not talking about too much server-side stuff, but just so you understand that they're different things. You can imagine that maybe that this is a blog post here on the upper right. And it's like a blog post and then some comments there in the pink and maybe recent comments in the blue and the weather or something on the bottom right there in green. Those are all little things that probably pull the data dynamically. They pull it from a database or something. So when server-side caching is, that page gets requested and created once and then saved as a static thing, probably a static.html file. And then what gets served out from the server is just that static bit of information. And when one of those dynamic bits changes, the cache gets invalidated, it gets created again. But there, for the most part, people aren't making 5-10 database calls per page load. It's just pulling down a static resource. Less weight on your server. So to understand this stuff a little bit better, let's think about one web request. Here's the players in one web request on the internet. There's a server. It's basically just a computer like the one you're probably looking at now, but it's just kind of optimized to run very little software that's just for serving up web pages. There's a browser, which you're all familiar with, and then there's Dude. So Dude uses a browser. The browser then traverses the internet and makes its way to your server. The server understands what the browser is asking for, and it returns some files to the browser, which gets rendered into a website, and Dude uses it. So in the context of client caching, where we're saving on this expensive round trip is the less communication between the server and the browser. The browser doesn't need to go ask the server for as many files because it already has some of them present, which we told it to do with that htaccess thing. We said, hey, hold on to these files. When you pull down that CSS file, hold on to that, because when the page reloads again, I don't want you to have to go back to the server and get it. I want you to use the copy that you already have. So if you're interested in this, right, we can, that's where we're going to get to. Go to the HTML5boilerplate.com, click the GitHub button wherever you find it, go to the htaccess file. This should look familiar to you. We just did it for something else. And go to the expires headers section. This is where it says files of these particular types, like you can see one in there, expires by type, image/GIF. Hold on to it for 1 month. That's kind of it's the weird access plus 1 month text there. That's how long you're telling the browser to hold on to these files from this particular website. So grab that code, paste it in your htaccess file, and you're good to go. And what happens here, the little exchange is like the browser or the server is literally telling the browser, hey, hold on to these files. You might need them later. And the browser will just honor that request. The theory being here, ancient Eastern wisdom here, the fastest HTTP request is the one not made. Nobody really knows who said this first, but it's a nice kind of adage, and actually I'm pretty sure it was the crazy green glass Buddha guy, right? Yeah, for sure. So if you do that, if you tell the browser, hey, hold on to this CSS file, hold on to this JPEG, hold on to this JavaScript file for a month, well, what happens when you need to change that JavaScript file? Then your changes won't be seen on the live site. Well, it's up to you to break the cache then. And an easy way to do that is just to append a query string to the end of the file name where you link this thing up. Just put $v = 1, 2, 3. And if that doesn't seem to work for you, there's some configuration. Usually this works nowadays, but you might have to do a little bit more htaccess dancing and put the version number right in the file name. Sometimes that works a little better. There's a link here at the bottom of the screen that can get you going in the right direction there. So yeah, just that way for sure. When you make a change to this file, the browser thinks it's a new file, and your changes will be seen on the site. It's just an important little step there. These are big things. Telling the browser to hold on to those files is so huge for web performance. Not even to make that round trip will really speed up your website. So on the server-side caching, it's just less of the server churning. When we turn on server-side caching, it might keep your server online a little longer when you do server-side caching. So just so you understand in the round trip where caching is helping out. So if you use WordPress like a lot of you do, I'm sure it powers like half of the internet. That server-side caching is easy. Just install the plugin W3 Total Cache, and it will get it configured and do that server-side caching for you. It's pretty smart. So number 3, losslessly optimize images. Losslessly being an important word there. I'm talking about making your images smaller, but not changing the quality of them. So don't be afraid to do this. Everybody knows you can, in Photoshop, you can just slide the JPEG quality slider down, and it makes the file size smaller, but at the cost of quality. We're not talking about that. So let's just, this is just for funsies here. You can go up to, this is old and irrelevant now, but whatever. Not irrelevant. It's very relevant to this talk, but I don't mean to keep picking on South by Southwest here, but it just is, it's kind of a true story. If you visit, at the time, you could visit this site in your browser, and you can go up to the file menu in your browser and just say save web page as. Not even a lot of people know you can do that. It's kind of useless in general, I guess. It's just to save the website for offline viewing or something. But it will pull down all the resources and kind of put them all in a folder for you, wherever you save the file to. And I did that. So I have all that and I looked at all the images that were in use on this website, and there's 1.7 megabytes of images on South by Southwest.com. So let's hold on to that for a second and talk about this software called CodeKit. No, they're not a sponsor of this. I'm literally talking about optimizing images here. It's Mac software, and we'll cover some Windows alternative in a minute here in case you use that, so don't worry. But CodeKit is really good software that does a lot of cool things for developers. One of the things that it can do is do this losslessly optimizing images stuff. So when you have this software open, you download it and install it. It costs a few bucks. I'll show you some free alternatives too, but it's well worth it. One of its abilities here is images. So I took that folder that I saved from southbysouthwest.com and I dragged it onto CodeKit here. And then I clicked on the images button at the top tab here, and I selected all the images that were part of it and just hit the green optimize button in the bottom right corner there, you can see what it did. It took 1.7 megabytes of images and made them into 1 megabyte. 40% savings. We saved 700K on the weight of the site by clicking one button and pushing these things back up. So that, you could imagine with a tremendous speed savings that is by clicking one button. What an easy win. Wow. So ImageOptim can do that on the Mac as well, and it's free. CodeKit can do a bunch of other cool stuff too, which we'll cover later. So, I'm still advocating that. But if you just are interested in the image optimization thing, ImageOptim on the Mac is free, and Ping Gauntlet, and it's not just PNGs, it's any image format, does the same thing on Windows and is also free. So that's good stuff. Number 4 is to combine CSS and JavaScript files together. A big deal. Remember, the slowest thing that a website can do is go ask for a file from the internet. So the fewer the times that it has to do that, it's great. And notice I put spriting down here too. That's the act of combining image files together. And we haven't talked about it much because it's more complicated. A lot of you know about spriting already. That's great. If you know about that, spriting is harder than any one of these things that we've talked about so far. All the rest of these are so easy to do. That it just makes no sense not to do it. So I'm not even going to talk about spriting. I'm just saying that that's kind of an advanced technique compared to these really easy things. So how do you do that? Well, a quick little preface here. I have this thing I call the 1, 2, 3 rule, meaning that I think pretty much all websites on the internet should either have 1, 2, or 3 JavaScript files and CSS files. And if there's any more than that, it's probably symptomatic of a problem that you could fix performance-wise. And it's not a matter of 1 is always faster than 3. Sometimes 3 is ideal. So this is the deal. There's always some kind of global CSS, right, that all the pages on the site use that sets up kind of common design patterns, typography in the grid and stuff like that, probably. And then if your site has significantly different sections in it that are, styled differently from section to section, it probably makes sense to use global and some kind of section. Or maybe there's just some strange one-off pages on your site. You'd probably load global and then the page-specific CSS. And maybe if your site's quite complicated, you have global and then section-specific CSS and then page-specific CSS. So maybe 3. But if you have any more than that, you're probably... you need to get doing a better job of combining. And I'm not saying you should author only 1, 2, or 3 CSS files. I want you to author in as many tiny little CSS chunks as makes sense for your brain to work in. I do that all the time. If I'm working on the navigation for a site, this navigation is its own CSS file. And those get combined and compressed together to form global.css before it gets deployed. Right? So you work in tiny little chunks and then only deploy, and the website only uses the one CSS resource. So here's an example from CSS Tricks. On the JavaScript side, the site uses one JavaScript file. It'll use the jQuery library, which we load separately, which we'll talk about later. And then there's just one file, csstricks.js, which is all the rest of the JavaScript. It contains my hand-authored JavaScript file, but it also combines together some other stuff. So I use the FitVids.js plugin, and I use a code prettification, a syntax highlighting library. I can tell CodeKit here, you see on the right in the sidebar here, that file, my css-tricks.js file, should import all those other JavaScript files, prepend them, and concatenate them together. And then it outputs, you see the little red target looking thing there, and it makes a css-tricks-ck, just for CodeKit, .js file with all those things squished down into one file automatically for me. And that happens every time I make one little change in the file and just save it. It'll redo that and insert it into the page for me. It's really nice. So it's a great workflow for modern day web developers. So yeah, that's it. We did it. We hacked it. Dang, yeah. Those are the 4 things. Really significantly can make your website faster. Really big changes if you do those 4 things, and they're so simple, right? So it empowers you then to deal with performance trolls, right? So these people that are like, you use jQuery on that website, don't you know that's bloated and it's slow and you don't need it, and don't you know about regular JavaScript? And like they're whining at you for using jQuery on a website when you don't need it, and you're like, oh my god, I can't deal with this troll. Well, one reason I use jQuery is because I freaking love life. But there's a couple other reasons too. One of them is it's only 31K minified in gzip. Remember when we saved 700K off a website from clicking one button? I remember that. We just did it a few minutes ago. Number 2, it's probably cache. So you only need to load the 31K once. And even on mobile, that will fit in the cache okay. And then it doesn't need it again. And it's probably already cached by the time your browser even gets there at all. Maybe not on mobile in this case, but probably on desktop, because you're probably loading it from Google like tons of other places do. So it probably doesn't even need to request the file once. 2, it's on the Google CDN. Probably that's where you're getting it from. That's the smart thing to do. And it happens to be the world's fastest and biggest CDN. So I'm not sure I'm worried about speed concern that way. And let me think about a couple other reasons we should use jQuery on this site. But hey, wait a second. Is this your site? Is that a 2 megabyte background image of Scorpion fighting Sub-Zero repeated? Are you freaking serious? And you're the one yelling at me? So I want everybody to here to agree. If you're watching this video still, if you've made it this far, let's promise together that we're going to turn on HTTP compression. Make sure that we're gzipping our sites. Just a freebie performance gain. So easy. We're going to think about caching, especially the really easy kinds of caching. The automatic stuff. We're going to losslessly optimize our images with one click. You can make a huge difference on the site. And we're going to do our best to combine CSS and JavaScript files and images if we can into sprites. Very lovely. Thank you everybody for watching this video. I'm at Chris Coyier. See you later, guys.